perspectives and say they're both right from a given perspective, and how can we join them up, you know? And this was brought home to me when I was doing my history degree at the University of London. One of the greatest British historians, a man called Arnold Toynbee, he wrote a history of the world in like 27 volumes. He was an amazing guy. And he started out as professor of Greek history at the University of London, where I studied, I did Byzantine Greek and Southeast European history under the current chairholder. And during World War I, Toynbee, who was also writing for the Manchester Guardian newspaper, he went to Turkey to try and get the story from the Turkish side, because the Greeks and the Turks hated each other and had done for hundreds of years. And during World War I, they fought like mad. After the war, the Greeks had sort of conquered bits of Turkey and were quite triumphant. And they tried to go on and get Istanbul and, you know, going to kick the Turks out of Turkey. It's Greek. And they committed some atrocities in doing this. They were so gung-ho with Greekness. But the Turks fought back under Kemal Ataturk, and they pushed the Greeks into the sea. And they also committed atrocities. Anyway, Toynbee, as a proper historian, wanted to see it from both sides. So he knew the Greek side. He went to Turkey to study their perspective. And he wrote a book called The Western Question, because historians had called Turkey the Eastern Question. It's a thing in history. We study the Eastern Question, meaning east of us. But the Turks call it the Western Question. How do you deal with these crazy Greeks? How do you deal with those crazy Europeans? And so what Toynbee tried to do is look at both sides. And, you know, there's still an argument among historians. Was what we did in World War I, the British and French, by defeating the Ottoman Empire, smashing it to smithereens, and then creating all these little countries like Syria, Lebanon, Israel, etc., was that a good thing or not? There is an argument that actually the Ottoman Empire was probably better for that region. It had peace, it had security, you could travel anywhere from Aleppo to Damascus to Jerusalem to North Africa to Cairo to Istanbul, and you know, there was a postal service that worked, there was a train service, and we smashed all that and created this maelstrom of little competing states. So that's why history is important, and I think I'm like Toynbee. We should do joined up history and see it from all sides. So that's really interesting, philosophy and the humanities, and the religious studies side of it is covered here in the table. You know, like what are the deeper questions about how we see value, meaning, etc. Okay, so that's that one. Any questions, comments?
Let's see. I was thinking about when exactly did it get scattered? The empire?
Well, after World War One.
Okay, around then.
In 1914 to 1918, the French had troops over there, and they eventually were given Lebanon and Syria as a mandate by the League of Nations. There was an agreement. I've been reading a book called The Line in the Sand by James Barr this last couple of weeks, and it was a French and a British diplomat called Sykes-Picot. So Sir Mark Sykes was the British guy, and Eric Picot was a French diplomat in the Quai d'Orsay in Paris. And they got an envelope out and they said, when we defeat the Ottomans, we'll draw a line here. You'll have everything to the north of that line, you French people, and we'll have what's to the south. And that's why the French got Syria and Lebanon as their mandate after the war. And that's why the British got Palestine and Jordan. Well, that wasn't asking the locals what they wanted. You know, it was just imposing a new kind of imperialism. And the book explains in detail, the Syrians didn't like the French being there taking control, and they rebelled, and especially the Druze. They did like some pretty strong rebellions, and the Lebanese too, and eventually kicked the French out, just before World War II, in fact. And then the French went and did something very naughty, I've discovered. They funded the Zionist terrorists in Israel, who were then trying to kick the British out of Palestine. As the war was going on, the Jews started blowing up British officers and all kinds of things, funded by the French, who were trying to get their revenge on the British for losing Syria and Lebanon. So, and that shows a lot of information, background, to the current mess in Israel, like where extreme Zionists are still trying to wipe out the Palestinian indigenous people, who are Muslims and Christians. None of that would have happened if the Ottoman Empire was still running the show. So my only final comment about history is it's a bit of a frustrating art, because you can see all these mistakes and errors that happened, but you can't go back and fix them. You can only operate in the present and the future. So that's where we have to somehow clear up the mess from the past. And that's where philosophy comes in, and prophecy. Because looking to the future, we have to prophesy the good that will come out of it all. And that's where religious and theological approaches come in. I'm a great believer for keeping prophecy open. I don't like the idea that it's shut. As a Druid, I believe that we all have prophetic gifts and we can see the correct future to co-create. And that's the creative use of our accessing divine intelligence. And that's an advanced class in comparative theology. Okay, anyway, good question. Right. The next one. Let's move. We did the humanities. Let's go to skepticism, number 75. Okay. Yes, this was a Greek miracle, really, and to some extent Indian and Chinese. Thinkers back a long time ago realised that absolute truth is something that's quite difficult for humans to attain. We have short memories, we don't concentrate very well. We forget what we said yesterday, let alone 10 years ago. And even if you read thousands and thousands of books, you forget them all. So how can you possibly attain universal consciousness, absolute knowledge? It's a bit of a fantasy. And so a school of thought developed, which is that you should cultivate a sort of benign indifference and surrender and accept the human limitations. And the Jains perfected this idea. The Indian philosophers called Jains, they said every possible truth can be seen from so many perspectives. No one perspective can see everything from all angles. So they called this perspective Anikantvada, which means seeing things from plural positions, which leads to tolerance and a certain a non-fanaticism, basically. Now, there was a Greek philosopher called Pyrrho of Elis who went to India with Alexander the Great and met Jains and discussed with them. And he brought back this idea to Europe. He said you should suspend judgment on difficult things, like, is there one God, 10 gods, 3 gods, 33 million gods, or no God? How can we possibly know? Let's suspend judgment. Let's not kill each other over that. So he called that epoche in Greek, suspending of judgment. And he developed a school called skepticism, which became quite a thing in Greek philosophy and then Roman. It went underground a bit soon after the Christians took over, because they were very strict about, no, it's this way, it's the Trinity, it's the faith, it's Jesus is the Messiah. You can't question that. And unfortunately, the emperor got involved and insisted on his version of Christianity. And then skepticism was not acceptable in that thought world. It was fine to pagans, they didn't mind. But the Christians got upset. Until it revived after the Renaissance. And Montaigne in France was a famous Christian skeptic who wrote his famous essays saying, maybe the Catholics are right, maybe the Protestants, maybe nobody's right, maybe we should just have a good meal tonight. and just chill, you know. So he brought in this idea of ultimate questions can't be resolved, so let's just enjoy life whilst we can. And he became famous as a skeptic. His philosophy was then brought back in, and Francis Bacon, to some extent, followed this idea in Britain. He was influenced by Montaigne. And so that idea of skepticism, I think, is quite valuable in the history of thought. And you know, if anyone were to suddenly burst into this room and say, "You've all got to follow this box. It's the only one," I would be a skeptic. I would say, "What? What about that one and that one and that one?" You know, they've all got good points and they've all got bad points. So skepticism is an inoculation against fanaticism. And I agree with Montaigne, and also with Descartes, who 100 years after Montaigne brought in the same idea again in philosophy. He was from near here in France. There's a village called Descartes, down on La Creuse River where it hits the Loire, and he said, look, because what's the active verb of skepticism is doubt. He said doubt is a sacred duty for philosophers, because it's only doubt that stimulates us to do research and experiment and find out scientifically how something works. If we just say, well, Aristotle says it works because of this, well, no, let's doubt that and let's try an experiment. Let's invent Galileo and see what gravity does. Let's invent Newton, who can, you know, work out the maths. So science was stimulated by Descartes' doubting and skepticism. And science is a methodology which sort of sought to find some kind of foothold on the mountains of knowledge beyond complete doubt. Because, of course, you can take skepticism too far and you can become a total skeptic of everything. I remember having arguments in school with kids that did that, and they said, "Oh, I don't believe anything. I doubt everything." What, that you're standing there having an argument? Yeah, I doubt that. I could be just a phantom. You know, and logically you can doubt everything and it becomes absurd. Whereas it was Bacon who said, the beginning student of philosophy will doubt the existence of God, doubt everything, and that's fine. But a little more instruction and learning, you will come back to some kind of faith. The other side of doubt is some kind of, you know, some kind of faith is what Descartes eventually said, and Bacon. And then the other great skeptic is Kant, who said the same thing, that the mind cannot work out rationally ultimate truth, but we can sort of sense, having worked out the limits of knowing, we can then take a leap of faith. And I think that's been backed up with things like near-death experience research, you know, past life regression, all these kind of things that point to another reality scientifically. So I think the skeptics are, I love them, they're brilliant, but I don't think they have the last word. So that's my take on that. And then the last one, philosophy and mathematical theory, was it?
No. Physics and IT.
Oh, 155, physics and IT. Okay. So tell me why you chose that one.
Oh, just from all the boxes I had under my eyes, that was the only one who remained the most far away in my brain.
Okay. Have you studied physics at all?
No, not deeply, really.
But IT you've done. You're quite good with computers and stuff.
Yeah, that can be quite okay.
Yeah. I've often asked physicists to explain reality. I remember doing physics at school, and whenever I asked any really deep questions about physics, they told me, we don't know that. Just learn the equations. You know, when I said, well, what is gravity actually made of? How does it work? We don't know that. Just learn the equation. And it seemed to me that physics was, I mean, I love it, but it can't solve the most deep questions. And even with IT specialists, computer people, when I ask them, how do computers work? What are electrons? How do they make these computers work? They don't know. We just do it. We buy the chips and It just works. But I think there's quite a few questions to still ask. I've studied the works of individual physicists. The French guy, Poincaré, interests me. He was a philosopher as well as a physicist. And he was doing joined up thinking around relativity theory before Einstein. He was a polymath. And his, I think, brother was at one point Prime Minister of France. But he was just an intellectual. And he invented some of the primary stuff that Einstein borrowed for his relativity theory. And I've always found Einstein's relativity theory a bit unsatisfying, because he could never really properly explain it. I've just read a book about relativity theory, and it's like a series of thought moves that don't go anywhere. I think Poincaré's approach to relativity theory was better, and I wish that his ideas had held sway a bit more. So I think there's still many questions about physics that are unanswered. I have a particular fondness for studies in the nature of gravity, and I'm a fan of Newton, who is a physicist of sorts. And I've been to the place where Newton wrote some of his famous works and experimented with gravity. There's a centre in the University of Glasgow which is researching gravity waves. And if you think about it, gravity waves are everywhere in the universe, making things fall down, and in space there are minor ones. And yet we don't know what they are or what they're made of. And yet they're everywhere, which is a sort of paradox. So we're surrounded by a sea of gravity waves and nobody knows what they're caused by. So, there's still things to explore and discover. My daughter had a boyfriend for a while at Cambridge who was a physicist who'd done a degree at Cambridge in physics. I think astrophysics is really interesting, like how are the stars made? If you look up at the sky, I'm a believer in an infinite universe. I don't accept the Big Bang model of cosmology. I don't see how we can know the limits of the universe. It's just our telescopes aren't powerful enough. So we think we've reached the limit. No, we've reached the limit of our telescopes. I think the universe is perpetually self-creating. So I think there are parts of the universe that are exploding and creating new energy and new stars. And that what will be found eventually, if I come back on this planet 10,000 years from now, we'll have powerful enough telescopes and science to realise that energy is it does two things. It comes in on itself, which is gravity, but then eventually it explodes and it gushes out. And these two things feed into each other. And I think that explains the theory. That my understanding of gravity is that it's connected with the secret of cosmology. What I do think is dangerous is inventing nuclear weapons. I think that's something I'll blame the physicists for, is making bombs that can destroy whole cities. And we're still living under that cloud. I don't want the planet to blow up in a nuclear war. And I would ask my physicist friends to uninvent it, please, And that's why I'm a great fan of Einstein's work, who worked with Bertrand Russell to create a work of scientists for peace. So I was running philosophers for peace. Einstein and Russell created scientists for peace. And they have this thing, this clock that they keep moving the hands nearer to midnight, which is like World Armageddon. Trouble is, it's so close now; it's a few seconds away. Maybe we should reboot the clock. I want to live long enough that we can reboot it back and say, no, it's a long way off. But that's only going to happen if we get the political leaders to agree to sign peace treaties, which we did in the 1980s. When I was starting this peace work, we got Gorbachev and Reagan and Thatcher to sign nuclear disarmament treaties. We've got to get that again with Putin and whoever's elected in America and in France and Britain, to realise that they shouldn't hold the world to ransom with this misuse of physics. I'd rather people studied theology than physics, because it's safer. If you just speculate about the nature of the Trinity and stuff, it's much safer. So let's bring back theology. But anyway, so there's a big question about the politics of knowledge here, and how who misapplies knowledge. A lot of physicists work making weapons and new types of weapons, laser weapons, all kinds of stuff, and they get paid vast sums for this. And now it's all cyber warfare, so they're inventing cyber weapons and things. I think that all that's wrong. I think physics should be working for humanity, and that's why I would privilege the humanities over the hard sciences, because it's only with the humanities you learn value and meaning and love and purpose. Robots, physics can't do that. And now we're going down the trail of AI, where we're kind of like those kids saying to me, we don't need you as a teacher, we'd just be taught by robots. I don't want to live in a world like that. I love life and the meaning that we share together, creating it, friendships and so on, and robots can't do that. So, so anyway, we humans have got to take back control from the robots. That's my position on physics.
HI, right?
Yeah, human intelligence as opposed to AI, artificial intelligence. We need to develop HI. Thank you. And to do it in humility with maybe the help of DI, which is divine intelligence, which is where we can get inspiration to really become truly human again and humane. Right, okay, so those are those three, yeah? Let's move on and do the Tarot of the Gods then. See what the gods want to say about this. Because they may have, we just mentioned divine intelligence, they may want to,
It's their turn. Yeah.
it's their turn, yeah. Yeah, have a shuffle and choose one.
All right. Ra, King of Fire. Have you got
We had him
this?
last week, so
Oh,
do
right.
another one. Well, we won't have Ra. Leave him out,
Yes.
but we
Sorry,
won't
Ra.
have him.
Right behind him, we got Ace of Earth, Thor.
Okay, that's a good one. Thank you so much. Yeah, well, we haven't had him for a while, if ever. Yeah. Thor.
Oh, the water.
Okay. Manannan MacLear. Yes, we had him a while back. Let's have a different one. Because he keeps popping up.
Yeah, he loves the attention.
You know that.
Oh, okay. Indra. Yeah, yeah. Right. I'll do one as well, just for fun. Yes. Right. There we are. Adonis, or Tammuz, the two of water. Right. Okay, let's have Thor first. So, Thor, yes. The Ace of Earth. Well, he was very powerful god, and he stands for that strong energy that can build anything or do anything. And he has great strength physically, but also mentally. So his hammer was his favourite tool. And he's got a magic hammer that he can throw through the air and it comes back to him. We've all seen the movies.
Last week we had Hephaestus.
Hephaestus is similar. Yeah. Thor's from the northern countries, so Scandinavia. And I've always, quite liked Thor. He's still in the English days of the week. Thursday is named after him, Thor's Day. in France, jeudi is named after Jove, I believe, who was some say the equivalent. He was the son of Odin, so he wasn't the top god. He accepted Odin as the king of the gods, but he was like the backup, like the bodyguard of the gods in Asgard. And he was the picture which tells his myth, if you want, one of his great stories, is a story that happened with Loki, who was always trying to trick Thor. There's conflict between Loki, who was the mischievous god, and not evil, but the closest thing to a devil the Scandinavians had. He's always being a trickster. And he was jealous of Thor because Thor had the good looks, the nice women, a red cloak, all the kind of things that, go down well with the ladies. And Loki was not so popular. So he tried to make up with cleverness for his deficiency in strength. Anyway, he thought he'd trick Thor one time because he challenged him to a drinking contest. And they used these big horns. So Loki, drowned his drinking vessel, and then he gave Thor his one, which was really, really big. And Thor said, "Well, this is a bit big, isn't it?" He said, "No, you're a super god, so you've got a really long one, right?" But it went out, even out of the drinking hall, and Thor said, "Oh, okay, go on, I can do it. I'm Thor." So then he took a swig from it, thinking he'd down it very quickly, and he took loads of glugs, and he looked at it, and it had only gone down that much in the drinking horn. He staggered back. He said, "I can't do any more. I'm sorry. You've won." But then Loki turned white and said, "Help! Oh no!" and sort of got very disturbed. And it was then discovered that the drinking hall was connected to the sea. It had gone down from the drinking hall to the beach and into the sea. And what Thor had just done was to reduce the sea level all over the world by this much, taking huge sips, right? And Loki was afraid now because although it looked like Thor had lost, actually he'd won. So this is, to me, in my interpretation of this card, I use this as a metaphor for the feeling that we all have of not being able to accomplish very much. Like we try and do so much, but only a little bit happens. Nothing we do seems to make a dent in things. I think what we've all got to remember is that every little bit we do for peace, for truth, for learning, for love, is making a dent in the sea, the collective sea of ignorance, let's say, that surrounds us. And so I think that's an important metaphor, that we shouldn't be downhearted and think, oh, it's not worth doing anything because, it's not making a difference. No, it is. Every little bit makes a difference. And so I think that's why his teaching there is important. And we should honour that about this God. So, yes, a sacred figure. And if you want the details, read the book. I go into a huge amount here. And in Scandinavia, I know people in Norway and so on, they wear a hammer around their neck. It's like, instead of a Christian cross, if you're a pagan, you wear a Thor's hammer. I've got one upstairs. I don't wear it all the time. But it means I accept that wisdom. And of course the wisdom of the runes is part of this, because Thor was the master of the runes. Although they're invented by Odin, Thor knew them and uses them. So I would like to honour that, that tradition. And that's why I wrote that book, The Kabbalah Runes, explaining how the runes and the Kabbalah come from the same ultimate root. And one thing that's interesting is the oldest Turkish writing is written with runes, found in China using Scandinavian rune marks from the 6th century. So this means that some Scandinavian Thor type people, Odin followers, had gone all the way through Central Asia to China and taught these ancient Turks how to write using the runes. And I find that absolutely fascinating, because you can see these ancient Turkish shamans who followed Tengri, the god of the sky, would have got on really well with the Thor and Odin people. And they would have had fantastic conversations. Yes, that's why history is so interesting. Yeah.
Don't you think the Soviets, with the hammer, is coming from Thor? And Ceres is using the woman?
Yes, I think some of the Soviet intellectuals knew this tradition, and Russia came partly from Varangians, who were Vikings, who helped found Russian civilization, particularly Novgorod, which is up in the north of Russia, was a largely Norse city civilization, very democratic. Unfortunately, Ivan the Terrible, who was a crazy guy, slaughtered and massacred and killed everyone in Novgorod because he was just crazy. And so Russia has this struggle within its own soul between dark and light. Their main god is Perun, the old Russians, who is a bit of a Thor deity, who stands for thunder and lightning. And that's the other thing Thor does, is he does thunder and lightning. And some linguists say that he's the equivalent of Tyrannus, who was the Celtic god of this area, who was the god of thunder and lightning. So Tyrannus and Thor are probably connected, and possibly Perun. So yes, I think, what should happen is that those that respect these lineages should get together with others that do and make peace. We should apply Thor energy to peacemaking now instead of war, and apply Tyrannus energy to peace. Instead of France and Russia having nuclear wars, we should make nuclear peace and make deep peace, so that we can get on with life. Yes. So anyway, good question. Right, let's move on. Let's look at the next one here. Well, Indra. Indra is the 7 of the major arcana. He's quite an important god, is old Indra. And he stands for the chariot in the normal tarot, because he's always driving about on a heavenly chariot and pulled by an elephant. He was the king of the gods for the old Vedic Indians. And when I went to where Buddha was, influential in his youth, in the early days of Buddhism, I went to Nalanda, which is a great Buddhist monastery where they invented Tantric Buddhism in Bengal. And all these sculptures of Indra were there. And I discovered that the lightning bolt that is called the Dorje in Tibetan, which is a symbol of Tibetan Buddhism, was Indra's weapon. Indra is the god who hurtles lightning bolts everywhere, if you're naughty. And I realised in a flash of lightning, nobody had ever told me this in any books, that where Buddha was brought up in Kapilavastu in southern Nepal, they were Indra worshippers. Which makes total sense, Vedic Indians. And in fact, in a lot of Buddha's sermons and teachings and stuff, he talks about Indra's palace. The ideal is to get to where Indra lives, in the high mountains. It's a sort of a heavenly realm.